Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of A Lecture of A Slice of History with the Butterfly Princess. This week, I'm reading you an article from the March 2025 edition of the BBC History magazine. This article is about how the Kingdom of Mercia powered the rise of the Kingdom of England, and this week's article has been written by Max Adams, who's an archaeologist and an author. Here goes. Alfred and Bede, these are the two figures who tower over the first half millennium of the history of Anglo-Saxon England. There's a reason for that, of course. They wrote this history. The Venerable Bede chronicled the convention of Christianity, the Anglo-Saxons, and the triumph of the Kingdom of Northumbria over its southern foes up to about 730. As for King Alfred, it was during his reign that the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle documenting the rise of Wessex and his own stunning victory over a great Viking army in the 9th century. Seen through the prism of those writings, Northumbria and Wessex were very much dominate the stories we tell about the Anglo-Saxon world before 900. When we think of the great milestone of early English history, we inevitably think of the two kingdoms that occupied the northern third and southwestern corner of what's now England. So where does this leave the third great kingdom of the Anglo-Saxon era, Mercia? Mercia's story can be pieced together only in fragments, like odd strips of film left on the cutting room floor of history. Largely for this reason, the kingdom that dominated swathes of south-central Britain from the end of Roman rule to the unification of England has been relegated almost to a footnote. Yet when the strips are assembled, they reveal a truly remarkable story, one every bit as thrilling and consequential as those of Wessex and Northumbria, from obscure origins to the early 7th century. Mercian warlords began to assert their independence from their neighbours and went on to dominate English politics, culture and trade. By the 8th century, they were making waves in continental Europe, one even in style that King of Britain, and they lie at the very heart of Anglo-Saxon history. To fully appreciate why Mercia became such an early medieval powerhouse, you first need an understanding of the landscape from which these ruling warlords emerged. Mercia's heartland was the modern-day English Midlands, a region that is geographically blessed. It's framed by three great navigable rivers, the Trent, Severn and Thames, and by many other waterways that run into the fens. The two major Roman roads, known as the Forsway and Watling Street, intersected here, connecting the region with parts and former Roman towns. Extensive fertile plains, tracts of woodland, workable deposits of clay, iron, lead and salt, and downland for pasturing sheep were natural assets to be explored. Through the early Anglo-Saxon period, a number of desperate people found the land. Tribal kingdoms such as in the north west, the who sit along the Severn and Avon valleys, Middle Anglicans in the centre, Presbyterians of the Peak District, and smaller peripheral communities including the Spronglers Group and Swingonia farming, fringing the Great Fens, draining into the Wash. The first warlord to bring these people under the banner of the Mercia Matters, the kingdom of the broad people, was the heathen Penga. He rose from obscurity in the first half of the 7th century, perhaps among the horses to win victories against first the West Sussex king, and then in alliance with the Welsh against King Edwin the Northumbrian, who first converted his people to Christianity in 627. Edwin's successor Oswald recovered Northumbria's 14 acres for the best part of a decade, and in 642 brought his army into Mercia to take on Penga. That proved to be a terrible mistake. Penga's forces destroyed Oswald's army and dissembled his body, mounting the Northumbrian king's head and arms on poles at a place that came to be known in grim irony as Oswald's Tree, now in Shropshire. The following decade, Penga came close to conquering Northumbria itself, but Oswald got his revenge, or at least his family did. In 655, Oswald's brother, King Oswin, killed Penga and 30 of his warlord allies in a bloody battle on the River Went in Yorkshire. Despite this reversal, Penga's sons and grandsons became Mercian kings. They converted to Christianity, founded churches and forged alliances with neighbouring Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, Wessex, East Anglia, Kent, and Northumbria, while maintaining her historical friendships with Welsh kings in the west. Such alliances were uneasy and didn't always hold. In the 670s, a long-running turf war with Northumbria over control of the ancient kingdom of Lindsey, with Lincoln at its heart, was decided defensively in Mercia's favour after a battle on the Trent. Mercian expansion south to the Thames continued over the next few decades. Initially in the Kingdom of Essex, London came under Mercian control around 670. By the beginning of the 8th century, merchants had established trading settlements in 4 of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms at places such as York, Ipswich and Southampton. Soon, London itself had become a centre of Mercian royal ambitions, a nerve centre of trade and a powerful bishopric. So, successive kings granted land and privileges along the Thames to their ministers, bishops and abbots. In their own officials in the old Roman capital, with Britain's heartlands open to trade along the Trent Thames in name, and the proliferation of productive monasteries strung out along them. Mercia's rulers oversaw an economic boom. Archaeologists have lately been able to uncover a sophisticated side to life in the Mercian countryside. Excavated settlements show increasing signs of careful planning and of specialism in areas such as dairy, textiles, leather, working irons, and leadwork. minting. Increasing quantities of silver coins were minted by king monarchs when they turn up in excavations or through metal detecting. They are terrible telltale signs of otherwise unsupported trading sites, often when Roman roads cross important rivers on ancient trails. Place names, many of which were the process of farming in the 8th century, offer more clues. Those containing the elements birth a defended royal settlement surrounded by clusters of functional tongue names such as Charlton, Eton and Burton show how royal administrators were active in planning a network of royal estates on controlling strategic locations. Such clusters occur in the Trent Valley, for example, at Tewkesbury, Lookout Forts, with Burton and other telltale names close by. Like beads, Northumbrian kings, Mercia's ruling elite encouraged churchmen and women to improve the productivity of their estates. They commissioned Latin scribes to write down their laws and draw up their charters, acting in a sense as a civil service. Their new literature poets began to record their verse, their genealogies, and their epic legends in English and Latin. Mercian rulers also employed the services of sages, harlots, and prophets. One such Gothic from a noble Mercian family who lived as a hermit in the Wigan face of the Western Fens at Crowland played a telling role in a turning point in Mercian history. It was triggered by the death of Penga's late grandson, King Crowell, in 716. Penga's dynasty had dominated Mercia for almost a century, but was now placed in peril by the emergence of a youthful Prince Ethelred, a cousin of who had exiled him to East Anglia. Having secured the endorsement of Ethelred, returned to Mercia and seized the throne, which he held for an astonishing 41 years. In Ethelred's reign lay the beginnings of a revolution of Anglo-Saxon royals administration. For 20 years, he carefully avoided warfare with his neighbours, investing in setting the soft power of parentage and promoting wealth through trade. With the trading settlement that grew up on the Thomas Farm at Eldwich became, in Bede's words, an emporium for many nations who came to by land or sea. Ethelred brought the former kings of the old tribals lands into his council, vested and honoured them, and presented gifts of imported luxuries in exchange for their loyalties. He granted bishops in London and his most favoured royal monasteries exemptions from tolls in his ports, a generous tax break in return for their everlasting prayers and support for his politics. Increasingly, Ethelred used the booking of rights and privilege by charter to engineer lucrative contracts into Mercian culture in the landscape. A charter dating in 717 records that the king gave the Church of Worcester a certain portion of ground on which salt is made at Dulwich for the land of 3 salt houses and 6 furnaces in exchange in 2 salt houses on the north side of the river. Such was Ethelred's power that in a charter of 736 he styled himself Rex Britannia, King of Britain. A later later-day Emperor Mercia was now the most powerful English kingdom and the wealthiest. By the end of his reign, Mercian rule probably extended from the rivers Don and Mersey in the north to the banks of the Thames in the south, and from the Severn to the western fringes of the Wash. The all-conquering king didn't have everything his own way, though. In 745, Boniface, the English Bishop of Mentz on the Rhine, wrote a letter to Ethelred asking him to allow a messenger, part ambassador, part man of business, part spy, to travel freely throughout Mercia to make his proposal even more attractive. The bishop also sent a hawk, 2 falcons, 2 shields, and 2 lances as tokens of affection. Ethelred had accepted Boniface's offer, but may have come to regret that decision. Soon Boniface was writing him another letter, this one fizzing with accusations that the king had been fornicating with nuns rather than taking a lawful wife. This scandalous intelligence had of course been gathered by his messenger. Nevertheless, Ethelred bequeathed his almost equally long-reigning successor Offa a powerful state apparatus and the bones of a social contract for governance. It was an impressive legacy, and Offa built on it further, forging a fearsome reputation. Even King Alfred's old chronicle conceded there was in Mercia in fairly recent times a certain vigorous king called Offa, who terrified all the neighbouring kings and provinces around him, and who had a great dyke built between Wales and Mercia from sea to sea. Offa faced his own challenges, however. He had come to power in 757 after a brief but bloody conflict, civil war, and Ethelred's death. In the following decades, he faced rebellion in Kent, frequent Welsh raids, and ongoing conflict with Wessex for control of the Upper Thames Valley. Nor were Mercia's kings immune from the of a natural disaster, a great petulance in 759 and a terrible winter in 763 to 764 were followed by a summer of drought in which many cities, monasteries and villas, rural settlements were suddenly laid waste by fire. London was largely destroyed. It was rebuilt, burned again in 798 and rebuilt once more. In 839, it was a luxurious palace. Early medieval kings lived their lives on the hoof, travelling with their war bands, councillors, and household between royal estates where they would consume the supply and surplus of the land, dispense judgments and gift the most move on. So often must have seen such devastation for himself, but he was above all men of energy, a builder rather than a destroyer. His Great Dyke project fulfilled many functions, including demonstrating a zone of control buffering Mercia from Welsh raids, enforcing his rule among formerly independent peoples, and creating a to himself long remnants survive to this day. Other substantial engineering achievements included watermills at Tamworth and Hereford, and a magnificent timber casement bridge across the Trent at the village of Cromwell in Nottinghamshire. There were very likely trading waves at London, probably Northampton, and at key sites along the Trent near Newark. The age of Ethelred and Offa saw something very like the first industrial revolution in the English Midlands. Offa is almost unique among Anglo-Saxon kings in evaluating his wife Cynerbeth to a status that nearly matched his own. She minted coins bearing her portrait, sat as a royal councillor written off his charters. We cannot say how influential she was in their private conversations, but we know something of her wealth and resolve. She was seeking a prestigious and lucrative religious house at Cockham on the Thames. Excavations have shown that it was a successful trading site as well as a convent of nuns. This early medieval power couple also planned a dynastic legacy. In 786, the new Archbishop of Lichfield, formerly King Offa and Simbrid's son Egulf and his father's heir. Then in about 790, Charlemagne sent an envoy to Mercia with terms under which Offa's daughter would marry the Frankish king's son Charles. In diplomatic terms, an Anglo-Saxon counterpart offers empowerment counter-proposal that Egulf should marry Charlemagne's daughter Bertha, triggered a diplomatic row and trade embargo lasting several years. The row was resolved not by no marriage. The row was resolved, but no marriage took place. And after Offa died in 796, his son reigned for less than a year before following him to the grave. In any case, a tidal surge of historic change had already crashed against Britain's shores. 3 years earlier, in 793, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle recorded ominous portraits telling how fiery flames in the sky were followed by great famine and then violence, when the harrowing of the heathen miserably destroyed God's church in Lindisfarne by riveting and slaughter. Reflecting on this disaster, the Northumbrian scholar asked if this marked the beginning of some greater suffering. It did. The era of Mercia's supremacy would not survive the Viking age. From the turn of the 9th century, Mercian power handed gradually into retreat. This process was accelerated by the rise of a formidable West Saxon dynasty under King Egilbert, which asserted its own overlordships in the Mercians, Midlands, heartlands. Things got even worse in the 860s when the Viking Great Army invaded Britain and conquered East Anglia. From there, they were increasingly able to deprive Mercian kings of control over the East Midlands, eventually leaving them with just a rump territory south of Watling Street and north of the Thames. The Mercians weren't finished quite yet, though. Their heyday may have been behind them, but they still had a role to play in the evolution of England when King Alfred conceived a network of defensive birds to protect his kingdom from the Vikings' attack. He looked to existing Mercian models. When he wanted to revive learning among his people after the defeat of the Viking adversaries, it was to Mercian scholars that he turned, among them who may have helped the king translate important books from Latin into English. In his greatest military victory over the Vikings in 878, Alfred relied on a Mercian king army for its defensive support, and the Mercian town recovered by his children from Viking control. Not Tingletown, Derby, Lincoln, Leicester and others were the productive bedrock of later Anglo-Saxon England. In short, the legacy of the Mercian realm underpinned the success of Alfred's children and grandchildren in forging the Kingdom of England, which went on to be one of the wealthiest and most powerful states in early medieval Europe. It couldn't have done it without Mercia. and that concludes this week's episode of a slice of history of the Butterfly Princess. And that has been that article is written by Max Adams, who's an archaeologist and an author, and the article was published in the March 2025 edition of the BBC History magazine. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you can join me next time. But until then, have a lovely rest of your week, and I will see you very soon. Bye for now.